So I think we will begin. Thank you for joining us. One second.
Is it recorded?
Yes, Sarah Law should be on and recording with us. So welcome and thank you for attending our live Thursdays at noon community event. We acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe peoples in the Williams Treaties area. We recognize the long history of First Nations and Métis peoples on this land and show respect to them today. In keeping with this, we acknowledge our neighbors, the Wata Mohawks and the First Nations of Moose Deer Point, Shawanaga, Wasauksing, Magnetawan, Henvey Inlet, Nipissing, and Dokis. This week, we delve into the subject of diversity in local politics. Across Muskoka's 6 municipalities, there are 15 female councillors and 36 male. So women, who make up 50% of the population, make up about 29% on our councils. Of Muskoka's 6 mayors, 1 is a woman, Huntsville's Karen Terziano, and there are 2 deputy mayors, Heidi, Lorenz, and Nancy Alcock. In Almaguin's 15 municipalities, there are 5 women in mayor or reeve seats. Of 52 councillors in the 13 southern townships, 11 are women. In Parry Sound's 7 municipalities, there are 35 men and 10 women in elected seats. There's only 1 female mayor, Seguin's Ann McDermott. After the Federal Conservative Party posted confirmation of MP Scott Aitchison running again in this riding in the next election, there was a Twitter thing that happened where folks were saying that in a party, the Conservative Party, it is overrepresented by old white men. And Scott tweeted back, "Old, white, and male are the 3 things about myself I cannot change. Shame to be judged by these criteria and not my record of public service or the content of my character." The Conservative caucus has 99 male and 22 female members of Parliament. There are 98 female MPs across the House of Commons, making up 29% of all its elected members. About 18% of MPs in the House were determined by iPolitics to be Black, Indigenous, or people of color, but the Conservatives only brought 10 BIPOC members to the House after the last election of 120 MPs. While we aren't anywhere near gender parity locally, there are some women at the table. Other forms of diversity barely seem to be reflected at all. The question we are asking today is, why is there such a lack of diversity in local politics, and what needs to happen for that to change? We have 3 esteemed guests to speak to the issue. Trisha Cowie, an Indigenous lawyer, ran twice to represent Parry Sound-Muskoka as its Member of Parliament in strong campaigns. In 2015, she was just over 2,000 votes shy of taking the seat, and the riding voted in Tony Clement instead. In 2019, she took 30.4% of the vote. Erin Horvath and Brenda Rhodes both ran for MPP in the 2018 provincial election. Erin took 22% of the vote and Brenda about 9%. In 2007, Brenda ran and took almost 27% of the vote. In each case, the region voted in Norm Miller. So, some local parties do run women as candidates. Women, Indigenous people, people of color, LGBTQ people, young people, and differently able people want their space at the tables of power. We want to be in the room when it happens. Will this ever happen in Parry Sound-Muskoka, and how do we get there? Trisha, would you like to start us off?
Sure. I can start with a couple introductory remarks because I think it's really important to talk about why is diversity even important in politics, right? That's the basis of it. We can talk about it and say, you know, we need more, but the reason why is really important, because when you are trying to be reflective of Canada or of Muskoka, you want to be reflective of your government, to be reflective of the community itself, right? And if you, out of like across Canada, only 98 women MPs, and we actually women make up more than 50% of the population, you know, that representation is missing. And that also means that the way decisions are being made is different. It means that you're not going to have the difference in opinion as much, right? So the like the pushback and trying to figure out if a decision is a good decision. Generally, when you have more diversity in a decision-making process, you come to a better result. And it's not just governments now that are starting to recognize, look, we do need to be making better decisions, and to help that, we need more diversity. It's also in the corporate world, right? So making space for visible minorities and women in a boardroom setting is really important as well. And you know, businesses are seeing that as also a way to increase profits, right? Like there's a whole range of different benefits that come when you're inclusive of more people in decision making. And so I think that's a really important basis to start from, is to say diversity is important, and this is how we're going to build a better municipality, make better decisions at a local level, make better decisions at a provincial level, and at a national level. And why we don't see more people in those positions of power, we could go on for quite a while in that department. But so what I'll do is speak to my own personal experience. And when I was first approached to even run as a candidate, my first response automatically was no. I don't know why it was no, but it was, I had my law firm was set up. I had a young son, you know, he's now older, but I was really doing it pretty much on my own. And so the idea of running, like, how am I ever going to put aside all of my life to run in politics for a period of 6 weeks? And you know, there's the decisions with how do you make bill payments? Who's going to take care of your children? Who, you know, and there's no compensation for when you run. It really is a volunteer role as a candidate to get in there and try and represent your community. So the first response was a no. And if it hadn't been for somebody familiar to most people, Mr. Dan Mulligan, knocking on my door a second time and being persistent about it, I probably wouldn't have run in that first 2015 election. But really it was, at the end of the day, I decided, I put that ceiling on myself of why can't I run? It's like, well, why wouldn't I? Is basically why I came down to it. And there I was for 2015 and 2019. You know, I was feeling very strongly about a lot of issues, and it was a matter of wanting to make a difference at a different level than I was already in the community.
Thank you, Trisha. And you did phenomenally well, like out of the gate, coming 2,000 votes from unseating the candidate who, before the fall from grace that he had later, really was entrenched in this community. You gave a good fight.
I have to say, I really enjoyed the entire process. After you lose an election is a different story, but during the election and the build-up, you know, the people that you meet and the events that you're doing, it's very exhilarating. But it wasn't until the 2019 election where there was a lot more negativity and violence, I would say every day, towards me, that is a huge discouraging factor particularly for women, because I was the only one of the candidates to experience the level of violence that I did, coming down to death threats and the amount of misogyny online, and trying to protect my family from that vitriol. It was very exhausting in 2019. It wasn't there so much in 2015. 2015, it was more about trying to overcome the subtle and not so subtle misogynistic comments like, well, if it was a bikini contest, you'd win. Like that was more 2015. 2019 turned into a much more deep-seated violent process for me. And I don't know that would be the same for the other women on the panel today, but that was my experience, and those are definitely some of the hurdles for why there's no diversity in politics. You have to have the thickest skin and know yourself. You have to know yourself getting involved.
Yeah, you're really putting yourself on the line there. And the world changed from that first election to the second one. And I'm going to say that a Trump government had a lot to do with that, and making folks whose position is of hate and is racist and is misogynistic, making those folks feel safer to do the things that they do. It's my hope that the elections that are coming up are going to be, again, another picture, because I really am hopeful that this pandemic has brought out the kinder, gentler side of us. This is what I'm hoping. Brenda, your experience.
So I'll talk about, I think, when I was thinking about what I was going to say here, I'll talk about when I first ran for the federal nomination, which, like you mentioned, was back in 2007. And I was 27 years old, very young, and, telling people that I was going to run, I was met with comments like, well, you're not a lawyer, or you're not whatever they perceive those people in politics should be. And I think before that, I really didn't pay attention to that diversity piece. But as I got into it, the light bulb went off. And, when we talk about diversity, it's not just race and gender. And I think you alluded to this, Pamela. It's also about your life experiences, your thought process, your thinking, your morals, right? You're bringing all of that to the table to a discussion about changing, the province, changing your local community, changing Canada. And it's important to have all of those point of views around the table, like Trisha said. That helps shape the decision that's made in a more fulsome way, and having that fulsome discussion around it to make sure that everybody is under that umbrella. And that's, one of the reasons why I ran, is to hope to pull those people under the umbrella, right? And to bring people along. And like you mentioned in the conversation with Trisha, there is, the barriers. There is so many, and Trisha said that also. There's just so many barriers for women, and not to say, in my campaign we had people on social media that were, saying quite horrible things, hiding behind a keyboard. And like Trisha said, you need to be able to be strong in your confidence, and I think that might be where part of the problem is that younger people, women, people in general, I don't want to just say just women, but don't have the confidence in their life experiences and just experiences in general to run, right? When you absolutely would be bringing something to the table because you have experienced life in this way, which is different from the person beside them and different from the person beside them. And so, thinking that you can't do it, or I think you need to put that aside and understand that you can, because your point of view is important. You are a part of the population that you're representing. And that's what you bring to the table. And, when in my campaign, I talked about a lot is, I want to see politics go back to that. We go out to our community, we talk about the issues, and we bring that back, right? Rather than caucus pushing whatever the messaging is out into the community. And I think that's where, if you can listen and you can have those conversations, and you like to facilitate those kinds of things, this is something that you should be in, and you should try to take a stab at it. And like Trish said, you have to have the thick skin, but it's I think it's very important, and it's something that I think everybody should try. And sorry, just one more thing, Pamela. You're absolutely right. I think Trump and that culture is probably one of the biggest barriers that we face right now. And not only with comments and people hiding behind keyboards and presenting those comments, women are judged by the way they look. Number one thing, and I guess that goes for all politics. I can say that, but in a lesser extent to the men. And so that's part of the barrier there is changing that mentality and really trying to, like you had mentioned, making sure that people know that this is not okay. It is not okay to have those kinds of comments on social media. It is not okay, especially I think when somebody steps up and is willing to try to be a leader in the community. We can disagree, and I think that was probably one of the most amazing parts of my campaign is, we have the bad parts, of course, but standing on somebody's porch, having a debate about an issue. And I remember one day it was super hot. I was out campaigning, knocking on doors, and I met this gentleman on his porch, had a debate about issues, and it was a healthy debate. It was great. And then at the end, even though we didn't come to a middle ground, we were still polar opposites. He said, "Do you want a water? It's hot." And I thought, man, this is why I do it, right? Because we can debate and we can have these conversations as grown-ups and as people in our community, but we still care for each other. And I think that's a huge piece of it, and trying to make sure that we perpetuate that kind of interaction and debate and conversation.
Thank you, Brenda. That's terrific. Erin.
Yes, welcome each of you to this conversation. I'm so excited that you're having it, Pamela, with us. And Brenda and Trisha, just to build on what you said, I totally agree with this idea that there needs to be diversity in bodies, yes, but then more importantly is the diversity in minds. And Brenda, you were just talking about the culture. And I think that is a key thing, or at least in my experience, has been a key thing. So the way that we're doing politics right now is resulting in almost like performance politics of polarizations, where the culture itself, for me personally as a woman, it goes against the grain of who I am. Like fundamentally, it's not who I am. I'm a community engaged person. Brenda, when you talked about going back to the grassroots, what do we want to see happen at the grassroots? How does it all fit in? Like that is something that I bring in spades, and other women too, but not just people in female bodies, but this idea of when you multitask, when you're in charge of many things, when you see life through different people's perspectives, you bring that to everything that you do. And in this case, we have it set up where it doesn't surprise me at all that Scott Aitchison would respond that way. As a man with privilege, he's not seeing himself as a person with privilege. And I'm reminded, Brenda, you may remember this, but in one of our early debates, it was about LGBTQ plus issues. And I don't remember exact question, but I remember Norm's response, which was, everybody should just be who they are, and we don't need to, talk about the difference. I just believe everyone should be who they are. And I remember turning to you, Brenda, and being like, right, because there was once upon a time when women weren't even needed in politics because the men had our perspectives covered, right? Like, no need to include us, right? Because, what could we possibly add that those men, those white, older, presumably heterosexual, wealthy men don't already know, right? So there's a profound arrogance in this culture. And I'm seeing it even at the grassroots in a way that actually saddens my heart a lot. So some of those conversations at the door that I would have with folks, they would say things to me like, if I vote anything but conservative, I will be not allowed to be a part of my card group. I won't be able to talk to my friends. I would be disallowed from my faith community. Whether this is true or not is another whole thing, right? It's their perception of feeling like it's an us or them thing, and that unless they are a part of this one established culture, that they are not going to be protected or belong, right? And so I do think there is a culture of belonging that's driving politics right now, rather than a culture of democracy. And I think that's an important thing. When people want more to be a part of something than they do to be a part of a community, of seeing at the grassroots what we need, that's when you start to see cultures shift. And yes, I have experienced absolutely, animosity towards the diversity that I bring, which isn't just because I come in a female body. Some of the diversities that I bring, I'm also from an immigrant family. I have trans children in my family. I've spent 25 plus years of my life in Indigenous communities, and I have Indigenous sisters. My family's been business people as well as workers. My dad was a police officer, right? As well as I have many of my family members who have been in jail. So I bring this diversity, and I try to speak to things in a more wholesome way. And I don't think people necessarily want to hear that.
Mm-hmm.
And that becomes a very real dynamic that anybody who has a different opinion has to realize that the system itself is set up kind of like a freight train moving in a certain direction. And you can plug in different bodied people, even, people with whatever their lived perspectives are, into this moving train. And it takes a lot to slow that down or steer course. And so sometimes that can cause, I think, even me, to become discouraged that it takes so much effort to shift it even a slight bit. And then the old tactics are there. Trisha, you mentioned about some of the violence, as well as you, Brenda. So every single day I went out, people asked me, probably a dozen or more, how old I was. We would have that kind of conversation on a regular basis. People would comment on what I was wearing, whether that brought out or didn't bring out the color of my eyes. I remember talking to a guy about hydro. And as we were talking, he says, "You have really beautiful eyes." As though to say, it doesn't matter what you have to say. Broad, bitch, fill in the word of whatever derogatory thing was in his mind, right? You'll never be more than your physical appearance to me. And then the fact, shaking my hand and pulling me closer and saying, "I would not vote for you, sweetheart, but are you available tonight?"
Oh my God.
Yeah, that's a particular favorite moment, right? Where there's an absolute fundamental perspective that needs to be dealt with daily, right? And in some ways I felt like I was, what are they, Princess Kate or whoever, where the headlines are what she's wearing that day rather than what she has to say. And that, in particular, is very discouraging, considering I think I'm a fairly articulate, well-educated woman who's had a breadth of experience, and I'm being reduced to whether the shirt I'm wearing brings out the color of my eyes. So in jokes, I've said to a few people, if you're not sure how to treat women in politics, whatever it is that's going on in your head and you're about to say it, imagine yourself speaking to Norm Miller or Scott Aitchison. So you're going to shake his hand and say, "Norm, the color of your shirt really brings out your eyes." Right? We instantly know that is an absurd thing to say. That's a ridiculous thing to say, but this is what we're faced with every single day in the public eye. And I too have had, experiences where my face was cut up on a poster, where my children have been harassed going to school. Now, thankfully, they have pretty decent personalities, so they know how to handle it in spades. But in choosing to run for the upcoming provincial election, I had to sit down with my kids and say, "How are you feeling now? You're both in high school. Mom choosing to do this is going to put you in a certain position. How are you feeling about that?" And suddenly it's not just about me doing something, but it's also me opening my family up to
and women are very aware of that, right? We're very aware of our families. It is my hope, I like to remain hopeful, that this next election will be colored by the fact that the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter, and now all of the hopefully soul searching that Canadians are doing about residential schools and the genocide, really, I can't call it anything else, that happened. I think that it's been a time of introspection. This is what I hope. And I'm very curious and hopeful about an electorate that has had to look at their privilege over the last few years. We will see what we will see. We also have Heidi Lorenz here today. Heidi didn't think she could make it, but now she's made it. Heidi is one of the 20 to 30% of women in Muskoka municipal politics and deputy mayor. Heidi, do you have some perspective to share with us today?
Hi there. I'm hoping you can hear me. I'm doing double duty because I couldn't log on with the sound on my computer. So if somebody can give me a thumbs up that you can hear me.
We can, but we hear you twice.
Okay, I'll hit mute. There, can you hear me now?
Yes, that's good. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, no, well, thanks for having me. I didn't think I was going to make it today because of, we were camping. We tried to take advantage of a week of nice weather, and then we saw what was coming this morning. We thought we'd rather pack up from the island and come home in the dryness. So I was able to make it. So thanks for having me. My experience is very similar to what we've heard from the other participants today. You know, when I first ran, I didn't realize that, you know, the scrutiny would be so much. I thought, oh, well, you know, it can't be that bad. And it's really not that bad. I mean, for me, I like to think that I, you know, have big shoulders and can carry it. But when you do feel it, you don't realize the impact that it has on you. I think, you know, I've been in a room where nobody's interested in talking to me, and then they realize I actually, you know, sit on a council, and then they'll talk to me. You know, it seems like a strange thing, but it's happened to me before. I think they think that perhaps I'm somebody's wife in the corner, and you know, that's bothersome. I mean, I don't pretend that it doesn't hurt my feelings. One thing that I've experienced also is that I find people don't converse with me directly. So when people aren't happy with something that I've done, they do a lot of talking about it behind my back. You know, I've been, I say, tattled on before. People have, you know, sent an email to the mayor or called the mayor to complain about something that I've done. So I find that is you know, a direct result of me being a woman. There's no way they would do that for a man. And, you know, that to me is interesting. I've tried to be vocal whenever I get the opportunity, but I think in municipal politics, part of the problem is it's just not easy to do without, to be involved without some sort of extra support. I fortunately have a supportive husband, but it's because of the way that it's set up and the meeting times and things like that. If you have to pick your kids up at 3 o'clock, you're at a meeting. So it's pretty impossible. And it's also pretty impossible to hold a job, you know, to find a job that will accommodate any sort of, you know, schedule. Sometimes you don't really know what's coming up, you know, and so that's why I think that we do see a lot of retired men because they have time on their hands. So, and the counselors that I serve at district, you know, they're all, you know, majority are white men, and they're all lovely, and they're kind to me. And so I don't want to paint a picture that it's difficult to do business with them at all, because it's not. But I just think to even get your foot in the door as a woman in municipal politics is very difficult. And it can be very intimidating. And sometimes after I've spoken and I read what I've said in the paper, I think, oh my gosh, did I really say that? but you know, I think that you know, that's myself being critical of myself, but these things do have to be said. So I think it's very easy to say get involved, and I noticed on one of the Facebook posts, I don't know why I do it or go back and read it, because it's not doing me any service to read things that are being posted about when these topics go online. They said, well, if more women ran, more women would get in. But the fact of the matter is running is the most difficult part, I believe, is to have the time and the effort to run. It costs money sometimes to run. I mean, it doesn't have to cost money, but you know, if you want to run a decent campaign, it costs money. And also, again, back to Trisha and Brenda and Erin all talked about it, is that your family depends on you. I mean, let's face it, women do most, you know, 65% of the household chores. They very rarely, I think only about 20% of entrepreneurs are women. So it's difficult. I mean, that's all there is, you know, that I could say to add to what's been said, but it is a very difficult thing to get in the door. And the other thing is you are taking a risk, because let's say you serve 2 terms and then you're done. I mean, how do you get back into the workforce? That's another thing altogether. I mean, if you don't win, you're unemployed. So I don't know. I think there's lots of challenges, and I hope that, you know, getting some word out will encourage some women to take the leap. I do think it is a bit of a leap of faith. But from my experience, yes, it's had its challenges, and I hope to see more women, and will do whatever I can to, you know, help support anyone who wants to be involved and wants to talk or anything like that. So I think we've covered most of the challenges that I've faced.
Thank you, Heidi. Thank you very much. So now to the folks on the call, I'm gonna it looks like you're unmuted. I'm going to unmute our callers as well. Do we have any questions? Is there anything that you'd like to bring to our panel? Diana McConnell says it is such an important conversation, and thanks to the panel for sharing your experiences. Oh, and thanks to Metroland for hosting. Thank you, Diana. Thank you for noting that. Okay, so not having questions, I always have questions. Do you think, so we've identified barriers. There are barriers. If you're not a person of privilege, how do you have the money, the time, and the resources to run? So we have that. We have the vomitorium of social media. You have to be prepared to ignore it or weather it. I think when we talked about the Trump era, and we talked about that's effect on creating an electorate that is less informed. There's also the vomitorium of social media, and that loop, that confirmation bias loop, that is so much stronger now than it was 8 years ago. If you believe something and your computer serves you confirmation of that belief, you can end up in a really deep hole, a deep uninformed hole, and also the feeling like you have a platform for those thoughts. So that's kind of on the negative side. Also in the pandemic, while I really am hopeful about how we're coming out of this, we can't help but note that women are further back this year than they were 2 years ago, for sure, because the working from home has meant working from home with kids. That's been hard. The whole burden of the caregiver has fallen really to women. And many women who were on a career track are just not on that same level of track now. So what is my question to the team around that? I don't know. I guess we're getting into our last 10 minutes. So as we round up, If you have any thoughts about those three things, Trisha.
So I would echo your point. Like, there's been lots of reports and releases on how, you know, the outcomes of the pandemic have fallen on the shoulders of women. And I guess how I relate that to our discussion about politics, it brings me back to an article that was actually done a few years ago, and it was with Metroland and Muskoka region, and you were doing a series on female lawyers in the area. And the one, when I was interviewed, I had made a comment about how I stand on the shoulders of giants. And I meant that. And, you know, all of the lawyers who fought so hard for me to be able to have a smooth ride through, or as smooth as possible, through my law career. You know, I didn't experience the harassment, sexual harassment or abuse that the women before me had to endure in order to find success in a career as a lawyer. And while we made leaps and bounds in the field of law, we are not anywhere close when it comes to politics. So you know, with the other women who are here today, you know, right now I feel like we are the ones we're paving that path for other women. So despite the losses that we've suffered, and because of the gains that we've made, you know, we're making space for women as we go along here, even when we're losing. I think that's really important. And so even though it's going to be a difficult road for any woman getting involved in politics, or an Indigenous person as well, right? So my other part of my background is as a member of Hiawatha First Nation. I ran as an Indigenous candidate. And, you know, government systems are not meant for people of our background. In fact, they've been developed to keep us out, to keep us down. And so to try and elbow your way in there, it is not going to be easy, and they're not going to let you in. You're not going to walk through that door. You have to fight for it. And so anybody getting involved in it, and just as through this pandemic, you know, you got to fight for it. And but the path is being paved for sure.
Thank you, Trisha. Brenda.
I agree with Trisha wholeheartedly, and I think you have to have that really big burning desire to go into politics, whatever level that is. And I think if you have that burning desire, it trumps kind of all the other barriers. So, you know, I know we've talked about a lot of negative things here, but really, campaigning is one of the most amazing experiences that I've experienced in my life twice now. I love the process. I love being on people's porches talking about issues that are important to them, and you know, trying to have those conversations. And so again, I'll go back to that confidence and that burning desire. Two things, like if you feel that, you know, jump in. There are these barriers. You know, we talked about relationship barriers that you may see change, and you know, the money, and depending on, I know on the federal and provincial level, there's groups that help women run and will help with some financial assistance there within the campaign. Once you start building a team, you know, people come out of the woodwork to help you and move it along. And both my campaigns were done. We didn't have a strong association, and we did it on a shoestring budget. But we made it through, and we did them. You know, I'm proud of the campaigns that we ran with very little money. Hopefully, you know, you're in a different situation. There's a strong association behind you, and you have that support. But it does fall into place, and so I don't want to completely discourage everybody. You know, because I know have been talking about the negative parts, but there's wonderful parts about it. And like I said, if you have that desire, you can't stop yourself getting involved in these things. And, you know, we're seeing these changes in the world, like you were saying, Pamela. You know, an example of the Olympics, right? We're seeing the handball team making changes. We're seeing the German gymnastics team making changes. These things are happening. And Trisha, to your point, we are, you know, I think on that that ground level, and it is starting to build. We're seeing our community change also. We've seen a lot of people move into the area that may have different points of view than, you know, our traditional population base. So there is stuff that's kind of moving along. And the last thing that I'll say is, and we also have to restore faith in politics in general, right? If you ask the average person, you know, about politics, it's usually a negative thing, right? Where, you know, again, we talked about the structure of it, but we need to change that perception, and that's, in my opinion, cleaning it up, and also making sure that people are heard in their communities at all different levels. And if you're out there doing that, that's just such a positive thing, and it will change. And I think there is momentum for that change. So I just wanted to be a little bit more on the positive side, because it is an experience unlike any other.
I love that point, Brenda. And to anybody who is watching this, who's thinking about running, please do think about running. And you can reach out to me, psteele @metroland.com, and I'll hook you up with some of these women, and we'll get some support for you and some guidance. So do think about running. Here's somebody who isn't just thinking about running, but running. Erin, do you want to bring us home?
Certainly. I love that you're bringing up the idea of diversity in voices, Brenda. I believe in our provincial election, there was almost 40% of people who did not show up to vote. And understanding why people aren't doing that, like why are they not showing up, is an important part, because we do need to have diversity of people represented in right from the grassroots up. It's not just good enough to start plugging in women or people with other diversities into these roles. We need to start to hear. And yeah, that does mean overcoming and bringing to the forefront that our political system is broken. It shouldn't be a wonder that a lot of people go, this is ridiculous. You know, you've got to choose which of the candidates you think are going to be the least destructive, right? And that is a really unfortunate place to be in when people, and I've heard that piles of times at the doors, right? Where people they have no fundamental sense of security in voting for anyone. So there's that divide, right? So what can we do? All of us have some form of privilege. Become aware of what our privileges are. It's not a light switch. It's not an all or nothing thing. And start to imagine what it's like. So those of us who are say, white women, so we have some privileges because of that, right? Our whiteness, perhaps, but then we have some disadvantages because of our gender. Okay, fine. But then now start to understand, what is it like to be a part of this pandemic, to be a part of our riding, if you don't fit into some of the categories where you might have multiple layers of lack of privilege? What then do we do to get those voices heard? And, you know, it's not necessarily about all things being equal, but things being equitable. So how do we start to set things up, you know, for example, in debates? How do we make sure there's gender parity? There's been times when I was unofficially counting in my head how many white-faced older males came to the mic to ask questions, right? Let's have a mic set up for different peoples and take turns so that those voices are coming to the forefront, where you don't have to elbow your way just to ask a question. You know, begin to set up our political parties in such a way that it's less adversarial. Look at ways at the grassroots level. We have brilliant people who have diverse alternative ways of thinking about things. Can we work together differently so that we're not continually dividing the liberal-minded votes? And I don't mean liberal meaning the party, but those of us who are thinking about things in a different way than the patriarchy would suggest we should. How can we be doing things in such a way that we're working towards a common goal together and kind of building on, which is why it's an honor to be a part of something like this, where it's across party platforms, it's across, you know, provincial, federal, municipal. We need to start to come together to look at this in its larger picture, not just for the, you know, our tiny riding or our one single campaign, but this larger issue of how do we, you know, begin to transform our world so it is more fair and equitable and just.
that is a great place to end this, working together. So if it's 2 o'clock in the morning after you've watched this and a question comes to mind, please do send me an email, psteel, P-S-T-E-E-L @metroland.com. Thank you very much to our esteemed guests. Thank you to the folks who came out, and thank you to the folks who are going to be watching later. And next week, next Thursday at noon, we're going to talk about the real estate bubble. Can it keep going? What's next? We'll see you then, and thanks so much.